Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Working for You. I am Lesroy Williams. Thank you very much for joining us for our program today. Of course, your company is appreciated from week to week. Today we are going to be having a discussion on the national quality infrastructure that we have in St. Kitts and Nevis. And I have with me officials from the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards. The question that we are going to be asking and debating is, are we a dumping ground for products, goods, services, commodities that are of inferior quality because we do not have a national quality infrastructure that is in place? I have to my immediate right Mr. Jermaine Mike, who is the head of standards at the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards. And additionally, I have Mr. Stuart Laplace, who is the director of the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay, my first question to you is about the Bureau of Standards. What is the function, or what are the functions of the Bureau of Standards?
I guess I can take that. The function of the Bureau is basically to preserve the health and safety as it relates to trade for St. Kitts and Nevis, anything that is consumable, anything that persons would use in trade. The intent and purpose of the Bureau is to ensure that that is done in a safe and coherent manner using standards and regulations. So in a nutshell, that is basically the crux of what we do in that aspect.
Okay, and you've put it in a nutshell, but what you do encapsulates a lot more than just a nutshell, and we will hear some of it coming out in today's program. Now, on the 5th of August, that is last week, Thursday, the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021 was introduced and had its first reading in the National Assembly. What is the significance of this bill? If passed, what does it hope to achieve for the country and the people?
Well, the intent and purpose of that bill came into place simply because the bill that we're currently guided by is over 2 decades old. A lot has happened since then. The dynamics that exist now did not exist then, so we now have to adapt and adjust to the environmental and the trade space that we occupy, and we feel that the bill needed to be upgraded significantly to address the current concerns we have as it relates to trade, health and safety, and environment in St. Kitts and Nevis. So with this new bill, we are hoping to narrow the gap between the other trading territories. A lot of the other CARICOM countries would have had an updated standards bill. We are the last actually to update ours. So we are learning from the best practices from the region in terms of how we should proceed forward, and we are ensuring that this particular bill would address more on the conformity side in showcasing the intent and purpose of having good standard relations as it relates to trade, and how we can have a better economic value, so to speak, once we start encompassing some of these trade and standard procedures especially within the manufacturing sector.
Right. And so therefore we are talking about standards, and the bill speaks to what we call a standards mark. What is the standards mark, and who can use the standards mark, and what is required of them for such use?
Standards mark. Standards mark is a mark that is used by the Bureau. It's like can be anything that is designated by the Bureau that is recognized nationally that can be used on any product, whether that is a label, it can be even something that is in construction. For example, we know we do construction concrete blocks here, that they can also be imprinted into that concrete blocks to show that, okay, these people are following a particular standard. So it's essentially, it can be something like a certification to certify, say, okay, this product has been passed by the Bureau of Standards, just to put that in a nutshell. Right. Who can use it? Anybody can use it. Once we give authority to that person to use it, we can give it and we can revoke it. Right? So it's like it's a legal mark, essentially. And so it would be recognized by the varying territories, whether that is regionally, and it can also be more on the international side, because we are the National Bureau of Standards. Anybody, any country within the world should recognize the national standards body within any country, right? So that is essentially what the standards mark is.
Right, and it's something of a license that you would have to grant for its use, isn't that so?
Yes. Well, it can be. It depends on what. So, for example, we can give. It can be something that is you have to do that is compliant, or something that can be voluntary. So, if we are, let's say there's a standard, and that by nature standards are voluntary. We have not made the standard as we would say compulsory or mandatory. So in that aspect, if we are evaluating a particular product or service against a standard, then that standards mark can be given to you voluntarily, but it can also be revoked, right? But then on the flip side, it can be a regulation where we're saying, okay, let's take, for example, the labeling of goods. And we said, well, just as an example, I'm not saying that this is it, but let's just say that any good that is produced in St. Kitts and Nevis has to be evaluated against a technical regulation for the labeling of goods. So we have particulars in there that we're saying that we're regulating. And so now we can issue this standards mark to say, hey, this refrigerator or this stove, it meets the regulations of St. Kitts and Nevis, and here is the mark that it bears.
Now you mentioned that the standard mark, I suppose you have to apply for it. It can be refused. You said it can be revoked or it can be cancelled. What are some grounds on which the standard mark can be refused or revoked?
Well, to give an example again, I feel that the best way to give these things is to give an example. Let's say a particular manufacturer in St. Kitts and Nevis is doing business. Let's use, we manufacture water. We manufacture water in St. Kitts. So let's use this as an example. We manufacture water in St. Kitts and Nevis. So if we give the standards mark to manufacturers of packaged water in St. Kitts and Nevis, it means that the standard that they are, the national standard that we are using within St. Kitts and Nevis means that these bottlers have conformed to it. Now, if there is any discrepancy in it, where maybe it was stipulated that they're supposed to test their packaged water before selling, and they did not do that, and so therefore putting the public at risk, right? We can revoke the standards mark from them. So this is an example of that. It can also be another example where there might be an importer bringing in appliances, but then when the appliance came in, the labeling of goods says you should have your products be in English, but then when the appliances comes in, it's in Spanish. You may also revoke that as well, right? So there are different nuances where you can...
If it is only in Spanish,
it can be in both languages. It can also be, and I gave an example earlier with the concrete block. If this is the standard for concrete block that you're making a concrete block, if you do not live up to the standard for making the concrete block, then we can also revoke it. And so customers know if they don't see that standards mark within the concrete block, they'll be like, well, I'm not buying this block, something to that nature. Yes.
Now Stuart, the Bureau, does it have a responsibility, for example, to declare and to publish the standards for public inspection and scrutiny?
Yes. So, as Mr. Mike pointed out, the standards are voluntary. So, persons who would like to take a look at the standards, they are welcome to come to the Bureau of Standards and have an officer sit with them and explain the standard, what it means. They can even purchase the standard. We have several technical committees that would normally sit and they will go through the standards and make comments where relevant to determine where we should go as a country. So the onus is really not on us. We are not the ones developing the standard or more or less deciding which standard to move forward. That is done by stakeholder consultation. So one stakeholder consultation from that agrees that this is a particular standard that think it's a Nevis should move forward with, then we would follow through with the adoption. Now, in some cases, some of the adoptions are done on the sense of promoting good standard practice. Now, because they're voluntary, it doesn't mean that you have to use them. However, there might be some instances where out of that standard, we have the threat of health and safety. Now, if I use the example of bottled water from Mr. Mike's example, you might have a situation where WHO would say that for instance, the pH of water have to be between 6.5 and 8.5 to be considered safe for human consumption. And somebody falls outside of that, then we have instances where it is happening quite frequent in both the waters coming into the country as well as the ones being made here. Then we may have to issue a technical regulation to suggest that out of this particular standard, we are enforcing the pH levels. We might be enforcing the label, the country of origin, batch numbers. I mean, these are just examples. On the flip side, the waters coming into the country, of course, you know, we also import bottled water. We may, for fairness in terms of creating that level playing field, if a regulation is in place, then we would have to get certificates of analysis for that product before it is allowed entry into the country as well. Because, as I said, health and safety is one of our primary pillars in terms of securing not only trade, but the persons involved in trade on both sides.
Now, while we speak about goods, the Bureau is also responsible in terms of standards when it comes to services. Could you tell us a little bit about that in terms of the service component? Because while we can speak about standards with goods, that they're of a particular standard or substandard or whatever the case might be, sometimes you have services that are not where they should be in terms of the quality of the service.
When it comes to, I mean, just like any, we don't usually separate goods and services from the standard paradigm. So just like how they can be a standard for goods, they can be a standard for services, and services includes things like you have, this is a service that we're offering at the moment, having the radio station. You can have standards for something like that. You can have masseurs, standards, massage, yeah, that kind of thing, and so forth, standards, right? You can you can even maybe have a concierge standards. The list is long. As long as there's a standard for it and there's a need for it nationally and so forth, sometimes it may not be a need nationally, but you may say, well, further down the line, because you can have forward thinking, right? And since a standard is voluntary, you can adopt it in the interim, that it becomes pertinent at a later date. Standards, the more standards you adopt, because of the voluntary nature, it can have huge impact when it comes to trade and tourism, right? When you adopt you may adopt certain standards within the tourism sector, where that has to do with water sports. That's a service. When it comes to even the beaches and so forth, right? Where we recently adopted a tourism standard where it says that the custodian of the beach, which is the government, because we said no private beaches, right? The custodian of the beach should have things on there like showers or bathroom facilities. And it was interesting because soon after that standard was adopted, I was over on the peninsula and there was some tourism. There was some tourists there, and they was like, you have to pay to use them. You have to pay to go in the facility to use the bathroom. And I just kind of smiled, not smile to say that I was happy or anything like that, right? It's just show that we were stepping in the right direction, where we were adopting standards that could govern some of these things, even though they're voluntary. It's important to know that tourism was pivotal in the Ministry of Tourism, was pivotal in both St. Kitts and the Nevis, right? We had consultation on that and whatnot, and so I started seeing some moves from tourism to make those things happen, where they have like containers, where they're retrofitting them and so forth to provide that kind of service to the public, right? So just these are some of the nuances that can
Right. I have gone on the beaches and seen locals, for example, giving massage to tourists using aloe vera and things like that. Now the question to be asked is, what quality of service are they providing? For example, do they have a license to provide that service? Do they have a certificate to provide that service? And I think in some of the instances, the answer is really no, that they really don't. And now, especially in this age of this day of COVID-19, the pandemic, which has so affected the entire world. With tourism, which you mentioned, now we are hearing that taxi drivers now have to be COVID-19 certified and all of that sort of a thing, which is basically having to do with what you mentioned, Stuart, health and safety come into play.
What I would say is, in other words, certified is being thrown around a lot, and from our previous act and even from this bill that we are passing and so forth, I know that the Bureau of Standards is the only body, nationally recognized body, that is responsible for certification. So I don't know what it means when people say they're certified using what standard? What did you use to give them that certification? So I just wanted to point that out because it is important. You can't just stamp a label and say that this is maybe agriculture certified, or tourism certified, or environment certified, or health department certified, and so forth. You have to kind of be careful when you're against what did you certify it with? Can you point to the standard that you certified? Can you? So some of these things we need to make sure when we're certifying products or services, or people, or whatever the case may be, that you can reference, because this is what you call good regulatory practices, good standard practices, good governance.
Especially in an age when you have so many things that are fake. You have people having fake certificates and fake degrees and all kinds of fake birth certificates and fake marriage certificates and fake news. There's a lot of fake. Yes. Let's put it that way. And people manufacturing things, fake ideologies and so on. And, you know, there has to be some regulatory body that really can say, well, this is authentic or this is not. This is somebody that can certify. Yes. Otherwise, we know what we have. We can have a lot of fraud. And I am certain as well, in the case of, you spoke about labeling, you can have a lot of fraud when it comes to labeling. Because what is basically on the label is fraudulent. It is meant to deceive the buyer and the consumer. So all of that, I suppose, you would have to inspect. Yes. And things like that. But I think we'll get there. But
as you say that, when you talk about inspection, that's some of the powers that the bill is giving us, where we would now have the authority to go out to places and inspect goods, especially when it comes to labels and so forth, not even just to go out into the general public to inspect goods, but even at the border, right? Because all intents and purposes, we are border control agency, just like agriculture is a border control, health department is a border control, Bureau of Standards is also border control agency, right? And so customs also, we forgot customs, but they're the obvious choice, as you know, customs. But yeah, when it comes to these, we would have the power to check these things. We would also have the power to kind of detain some of these things to make sure that they don't go out and get imported into the country, or if they're already into the country, be disseminated amongst the public. Right? When before we never really had that. I don't know if you would like to expound more on it, or leave it at that.
No, Mr. Stewart, we have what we can call national standards, and then we can speak about regional standards, and we can speak in terms of international standards. Of course, you know, we have CARICOM, which is the regional block, and it's a regional trading block as well. You have the Treaty of Chaguaramas, and now you have the CSME, which speaks about the movement of goods and services, and so on. We hear certain things in terms of the CARICOM skill certificate, who can move and who can't move. You hear about tariffs and free trade. All of these things come into play when we talk about trade. Now, at the CARICOM level, where are we with respect to the standards mark?
Well, at the CARICOM level, of course, you know that there is the CARICOM Regional Organization of Standards and Quality, which is CROSQ, acronym CROSQ. They are the regional standards for all the bureaus. So all of the bureaus of standards make up that body. So they are also a standard development body, but at the same time, you have to recognize that within CARICOM we still have varying interests. So there is talk about developing a CARICOM mark. However, you can also develop your own national mark, because we are still part of CARICOM under that same treaty, where we can trade free and fair. So whether you're adopting a mark that is used by CARICOM or you're adopting a national mark, it would still carry the same weight, so to speak. So a lot of these independent territories, like Jamaica, for instance, as Mr. Mike pointed out with the cement block, they would be using their standard mark within Jamaica on some of those items that the persons would go and purchase with confidence as it relates to the quality of the product. Now, of course, as it relates to St. Kitts and Nevis, we want to encourage persons to basically run their business thinking about international options as well. Simply because if you're at a situation where you're doing a particular product and it's very popular in St. Kitts, everybody like it, it tastes good, you're making a lot of money, you still cannot move it, simply because you're not using a standard. So if you're not using a standard, then it will not be recognized outside of St. Kitts. So that kind of puts you in a bottleneck in terms of accessing the overseas market. So it's not about who you know or what links you have, so to speak. It comes down to what standard are you using. It doesn't matter if it is a local standard, if it's a regional or international. You must be using some sort of standard for traceability. So if you have business intention of exporting and you're not using a standard, then you would have shot yourself in the foot from the get-go, because you will not be able to move if you cannot identify a particular standard, whether by code or otherwise, on your product. So regionally, the labeling of goods, the packaged water, those are regional standards that we would have adopted. So those standards that we have adopted here in St. Kitts is the same exact standards that has been adopted in every CARICOM territory in the Caribbean. We have a few international standards as it relates to beach operation, as Mr. Mike would have spoken to. That is an international standard, and one of the reasons why we went that route is simply because when a particular tourist would look at the tourism website, for instance, and they have this small ISO icon on there saying that we have drawing reference to, let's say, Coco Shell Beach is ISO 14001 certified. So that customer now would know that when I'm coming to St. Kitts, I expect to see bathrooms, I expect to see zoning areas for those speedboats, bathers, where you have beach chairs, you have security in terms of posts, you might have a small area for health and safety if somebody takes ill, like a sick bay, lifeguard, that type of stuff. So they're not wondering what they're going to meet. The standard tells you specifically what you're coming to, right?
What to expect.
Exactly. So if you apply that to manufacturing, if you use a particular standard and you have that identified on your bottle, then automatically it opens up a lot more gates for you because you are using a particular standard. There is a bureau in your country that would be working with you and verifying these standards as well. So it kind of leapfrogs you into the regional and even international space. But if you are not using any standard, then there's no reference to be guided by, and in that sense, you're pretty much static. Right.
Yes, and of course the tourists, for example, will recognize that this country is operating by very high standards, and that their product is of a very high quality. And that in itself would sell the country. So they will go back and they will tell their friends and their family that St. Kitts and Nevis is operating by very high standards when it comes to their tourism product. Now, I have been to developed countries like the UK, to England, and when I go to supermarkets in London, I sometimes would see meat, fruits and vegetables that seem to be of an extremely high standard. A higher standard than what I really would see here in our supermarkets. And I've often wondered, why? Why is that so? Why is it that the saltfish, the codfish in London is of such nice quality, and the one that we have here doesn't seem so? Stuart?
These are, there's speculations, but there's also a myriad of issues that we face when we don't have standards and regulations in place. Now, let's take our closest neighbor. Before we get to the UK, let's say the United States, for instance. They are run by the Food and Drug Administration as it relates to health and safety. So there would be a version of us on the American side, right? We have close relations with them, the USDA, all of the standard making and regulating bodies around the world. Now, in the United States, you cannot restock an item on the shelf that is within 45 days of expiry. So which means if it's already up on the shelf, it can go all the way down before they take it off. But if you're going to restock that item, the date must be outside of 45 days before it can go on the shelf. Now, what are you going to do with those items? Now, there's a market just below, which is the Caribbean. We do not have those rules and regulations in place here. So if you cannot make that grade based on the regulations in the United States, then they automatically become fair game for the other territories. So they would come here, they're within the expiry. So of course they can go on the shelf because they're within the expiration date based on the parameters we have set here in country. Now you have to also look at what one may consider an import market and an export market. Now if you are exporting something to SKNIS and you recognize that SKNIS have not posted any notification suggesting that we have any regulation on fish, flour, baby, no matter what it is, Pampers. So it's free game to send anything here, and we do not have the legal authority as it relates to trade to stop it, because there's no regulations in place to suggest that we do not want this because of this reason. If there's nothing stated, then you could pretty much send anything here, right? And that is the scary part, because you become a dumping ground for, let's say, meat. You can only stock grade A and grade B meat on the shelf in both UK and United States. Also the amount of nitrates that you apply to meats, for instance, as it relates to keeping down things like botulism, you would have those regulations in place where you cannot use too much of those nitrates on those items. Now, of course, if the meat is getting a lot older as it relates to the time it was purchased, then you have a situation where it falls outside of the grade. Now, that meat, in essence, can also find its way here, and there's a lot of marketing tactics where persons could inject dye, for instance, to make the meat appear red and fresh. So we are aware of all of these fraudulent tactics that persons would use, but as I said, we don't have any proper regulation in place to protect those supermarkets who are buying, who may be buying blindly, as well as the persons who are consuming and paying top dollar for an item that is perceived to be a top item. So the Bureau standards, we are here to protect both the retailer as well as the person who is purchasing. So it's not a simple assignment. There's no one area that we can focus on, but we're looking at the low-hanging fruits, things that we can change in the short and immediate term as a stepping stone for us to get to the much larger and holistic issues.
We already started seeing some of the fraudulent things, you know, and sometimes when we are being told certain things, like we will be told that you're manufacturing something in SKNIS, but you're telling us that it was FDA tested or FDA approved and those kind of things and so forth. Like, we are the national standards body. We are scientists. You think that you can pull that wool over our eyes, and it's just that we can't do anything about it, so we let it go, right? While he was talking also, when we don't have standards and certain regulations in place, things like certain countries, we import a lot of cheese, right? Just as an example, we import a lot of cheese. There are certain countries that will tell you that they would call their product a dairy product or a cheese product if it has in less than 50% of cheese. So you can, of whatever. So you can have something that has in maybe 45% of cheese, but still calling it a cheese product, right? Don't know how that is possible, right? Mr. Laplace and I, we had a discussion on chicken, where certain countries are allowed to send us chicken that can be up to 365 or 366 days old, right? But they in their country only consume it maybe within 6 months. Yes, about that, right? But here in SKNIS and Nevis, that is allowed to come in, and it's because there's no standards, there's no regulation. Nobody seems to see the urgency to have these things put in place. But we're here to try and change that perception. Try to, because not everything you can regulate, but you can inform the general population. You can inform customers. This is why certain basic information should be on a labeling. Like if you're gonna put like chicken, just as an example, because I just use it. I mean, you should have basic things like the slaughter date and so forth on that chicken. Don't try to hide that because you want to sell us a year-old chicken, right? Because you know people are not gonna, if they see something like that, you know people are not going to buy 1-year-old chicken, right? Whereas they would probably go for more of the local option because they know that sells easier or quicker or more fresh, right? But these kind of things are hidden on purpose. You can't do anything about it.
Yeah, so this bill, the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021, is meant to address some of those things. Mm-hmm. Now, I love Miss Lou's hot sauce. Miss Lou's hot sauce is very popular in St. Kitts and Nevis. Tastes good. I love it. But I have some questions about Miss Lou's hot sauce. What are the ingredients in Miss Lou's hot sauce? What is the nutritional value in terms of Miss Lou's hot sauce?
At the very least, you should have the ingredients listed on your product. It is supposed to be a requirement. Now, internationally, nutritional labeling, it varies. Sometimes it is made mandatory and sometimes it isn't. It depends on which country, but for sure, the ingredients are mandatory in any territory that you go to, right? That's without exception. You can debate on nutritional facts, but you cannot debate on the ingredients. A lot of people Well, local manufacturers, they like to be like, but if I put my ingredients on there, it's going to, I'm giving out my recipe. Because the recipe is different to an ingredients list, right? You can give me the same ingredients to make a cake, and you as a professional baker, and I am as an amateur, and your cake comes out much more better, fluffy and everything like that, and mine's come out hard as a rock. But we use the same ingredients. It all goes with the recipe, and people need to understand the difference between an ingredients list and a recipe. I get that too many times. Mr. Mike, if I give out my recipe, if I give out my ingredients, people are gonna know how to make me thing. How am I going to make money from it if they know, right? So certain, yeah, just.
But even if I'm buying a local product, don't I have the right to know my sugar and salt intake from that product?
You have the right to do that. You do have the right to know that. Not saying that you don't. It is whether the country is able to even give you that information. Because it is something, yes, we do have the right. Yes, the infrastructure, and we talk about national infrastructure. Testing is part of the national infrastructure. And so if you don't have the capabilities to test, then how can you, with confidence, give the customer that kind of information, right? So for SKNIS and Nevis, that is to have nutritional facts and so forth, or nutritional content on their labeling. The prohibition there is that we do not have the necessary equipment and so forth to do those kinds of testing, which we have. Is not for a lack of trying. That the Bureau of Standards, as we said, we're scientists there, right? Every single one of us. But it's whether you have the equipment to get the job done. And the country, they need to know that in order for you to, if we are, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but if politicians are serious about trying to get into markets, locally produced goods into other markets, whether that is regionally or internationally, they have to put the testing infrastructure in place, and it is very, very important. We can't send certain things to the UK because we don't have certain equipment to test for certain parameters that they want to. But yet,
Especially honey.
yeah, honey, we cannot send honey to the UK simply because we don't have the necessary equipment to test particulars in that honey. And they would not recognize it unless we have that particular equipment. So they can send to us as much as they want. Can send it on. And we don't.
For example, another area is that of metrology. You know, and sometimes people are defrauded because you might say, well, this is 2 pounds, but it's really not 2 pounds. I mean, let's face it. I mean, we buy things all the time. We go in the supermarkets, we buy things. Here it's 2 pounds, and so on. Who really checks it and say, well, it is really 2 pounds?
We have a very solid metrology department headed by Mr. Ivan Otain, and they have schedules where they will go out into the market and verify a lot of these scales to make sure that you're getting your 2 pounds, and that the business is also not giving away 2 pounds. So as I said, we look out for both. So they're both our customers. The person selling you is a customer of ours, and you who are buying is also a customer of ours. So we're ensuring that the playing field is leveled at all times. Correct. Literally and figuratively.
Right, and if you really see the scales of justice, because if they are not balanced, it simply means that there's injustice.
The scales of balance.
The scales must be balanced, otherwise the practice is unjust. It's not a level playing field. Now you work along with certain stakeholders. Tell me a little bit more about that. How do you collaborate, for example, with the Department of Consumer Affairs? You know, you have the Ministry of Trade, of course, Consumer Affairs. You have Environment, for example. You spoke about the Customs. What is your relationship with them?
No, well, we believe in, we really believe in collaboration, right? Especially because we are trying to do good practices, right? So when it comes to standards, we always take a national approach. That means we take entities from St. Kitts, we take entities from Nevis. So we call the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards for a reason. But when it comes to adoption, and I will revert back to the tourism standard that we had adopted for beach. We had collaboration from tourism, Ministry of Tourism, Tourism Authority. We had the public sector, people from the St. Kitts Sea Turtle Monitoring Group. We had education. We had environment, right? So every time we are trying to adopt standards, we always put out information to get these people as stakeholders, not just the public, but the private sector, where it will be mostly they will be mostly impacted by such a standard if any regulation was to come out of this standard. So we always hope and we pray, I guess, that the private sector would engage or take more of an interest, because once that standard is adopted, now when any government agency can be like, well, Bureau of Standards just adopted this in environment, you know, so can we regulate anything from this standard? And then all of a sudden, now you become interested because it's going to impact your bottom line, right? So we always express collaboration, and we always go out to meet them halfway as well.
Now, Mr. Laplace, what is the importance of labeling, and what are some of the do's and don'ts of labeling?
Okay, from the Bureau of Standards standpoint, one of the main issues we find with labeling, we know persons are trying to be creative and they're trying to sell their product. But at the same time, we recognize that persons are using nutraceuticals and placing pharmaceutical claims. Now, what is a nutraceutical? Nutraceutical would be something that you would traditionally use that has not been scientifically proven. So let me give you an example. You might say if you have a cold, you can drink honey and lime juice, or you can get some has rubbed down. Any one of those, that is considered a nutraceutical because it works, but it hasn't been scientifically proven as it relates to dosage. Is it safe? Does it have any effects? There are no clinical trials associated with it. So when you put something like that on your label, then it becomes misleading. So you may say something, for instance, this drink cures cancer, or it would make all your headaches and pains go away if you consume this drink, menstrual pains, cramps, etc. All of those are nutraceutical claims, so it is important that you have that disclaimer on your label. We're not saying it cannot go on. What we are saying is you should have that disclaimer on it that says something like traditionally used for, right? Menstrual pains, cramps, headaches, cancer, whatever, right? And then it makes it more legitimate in terms of a claim. Another issue, an example would be something like natural spring water. Now, if we're saying something is natural, that means it is not impeded by anything anthropogenic. So there's no human hands involved. You take that straight from the ground and you put it in a bottle. And of course, if you take something out of the ground, you must have microbial interactions. You have chemistry interactions from the metals, etc., that is embedded into the ground. So by saying something like that, it can be a trademark name to the point where it's just a name and you're not being suggestive to say that this is a natural product. So persons get creative with the labels, but the label is the only line of communication between the person doing the manufacturing and the person who's doing the purchasing. So that label must inform you significantly so that you can make an informed choice when you're making that purchase. So if you're reading this, your hopes are not up to the point where it's saying if I drink this and I have high blood pressure, it's going to go away. And you purchase it, you drink it, and you still have high blood pressure. Then you know who made that claim on your label can become liable because you are making a suggestion that has not been scientifically proven. So we have to be very careful with how we put these things forward, especially if you're thinking about export as well. Additionally, a lot of us in society are allergic to certain things. So as Mr. Mike alluded to earlier, persons do not want to give out their recipes, and they shouldn't. But at the same time, there's some ingredients that have to be listed simply because they're considered allergens. So if somebody is allergic to cinnamon, for instance, and you have the cinnamon as one of your main ingredients, we're not saying that you're supposed to say that you used a half cup or half spoon of cinnamon. We're just saying this product contains cinnamon. So that way persons who are allergic wouldn't just be under the guise that they're purchasing, let's say, a carrot drink, and you have cinnamon in there, but it's not labeled. So the person now, you said, oh, get this nice carrot drink. You take the bottle, there's no label on it. You do not know that that's the master ingredient in there, and you get sick. So one of the reasons as well why the cruise ships, for instance, do not purchase any food, and they do not patronize a lot of the vendors because, again, of standards. If we're not doing any labeling or identifying any standard associated with our products, then you do not have the confidence, to purchase items here because everybody is basically doing their own thing to make funds. And while we impure that, there is a way of doing it to ensure that you stay within the confines of food safety, and also ensure that you don't waste time and you don't waste money either, or get yourself involved in something that you could be liable for down the road as well. So as it relates to the labels, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done. It is very important as it relates to product recall. So let me give you an example again. You go to a supermarket and you purchase a lettuce, for instance. You're not sure where the lettuce originates. There's no batch numbers. You just know where you bought it and you know the price. Now, if there's a recall on that particular item, how would we go about identifying the lettuce that are in question from the ones that are not in question? So, right. So in a situation,
to put that same lettuce back on the shelf.
Well, not only that, we do not want the supermarket to lose money either by having to throw away all the lettuce that they have. So it's important to target the problem batch that may come down. Let's say from FDA or the USDA might put out a notice. We would receive it and we would pass that information on to Health and Consumer Affairs as well, and they would go out and do their due diligence. But at the same time, as I said, it would not be a good idea to destroy everything when it could be avoided by simply putting on a simple one-liner on the label to say that this came from Germany in this group and on this date. And that way, when you're going in to identify the problem batches, you only target those with that specific labeling. So it saves time, it saves money, and you narrow down the problem a lot faster as well. So a label helps in all aspects to make life easier for everyone, both the regulators, the consumers, and the retailers.
Yeah, while you deal more with regulation, compliance to certain standards of quality, consumer affairs, I think, has a responsibility in terms of consumer education. So, for example, you see certain labels, apart from the ingredients that are in, you mentioned, Mr. Mike, in terms of putting the ingredients that are in the thing. Sometimes you have to say what ingredients are not in it as well. So it's not just what ingredients are in it, but at certain times you can state what ingredients are not in it. For example, I have seen certain labels that would say no added sugar. Or you see certain things that say fat-free, or reduced salt, or gluten-free. For example, those are things that are, telling the buyer, the consumer, something. And they're in relation to the person's health. Then we see other things, for example, on goods, like best by a certain time or expiration date. We see sell by, we see use by. What do these things actually mean to the consumer? Because no added sugar doesn't mean that there's no sugar in it.
Exactly. It just means that there's no, as we would say, table sugar, sucrose, right? It just means that that wasn't added. So whatever sugars is in the product is naturally.
It's natural. For example, from fruit.
Yeah.
If there's a fruit juice and it says no added sugar, it means that the sugar that is in the juice is natural sugar from the fruit.
Yeah.
Is that what it means?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, sometimes we have this talk and so forth because when you say natural sugar, it can mean they are both natural sugars and they are artificial sugars. Huh? Aspartame is an artificial sugar because that sucralose is an artificial sugar and so forth. But sucrose, which we normal sugar that we use, this was extracted, right? So I would consider that natural sugar, right? Free and added sugar. So the free sugar would be what is already in the product, and added sugar would be like the thing that the sucrose
and then there are certain sweeteners like stevia. Stevia, I know, is they consider very it's healthy in terms of a sweetener, and so on. But it's actually it's an added sugar.
Honey is an added sugar.
Yeah, but at the very same time, it is natural. Yeah. Stevia.
yes. But but on the label, it would be considered an added sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
A sweetener.
Yes.
Yeah. And low fat and so on. So I think it's important, while we're talking about labeling, that, people understand what those things mean.
Before you go on, you had asked a question about the best buy and so forth, right? It's important to know that no matter what terminology you use, best by, expiry date, use by, sell by, no matter what terminology you use, you should not be able to buy it past that date. Maybe you might be able to use it for your own consumption, but that is the risk that you take. The retailer should not give you the option to take that risk. So if it's past that date on it, it's not supposed to be on that shelf. Whether you use expiry date, use by date, best by date, nobody that is in the retail is supposed to tell you, man, it good, you only mean this, and so forth. No, you're not supposed to hear that from the retailer. As long as it's past that date, not supposed to be sold.
Okay, good. So does the bill speak to the prohibition of production, sale, or export of deficient goods? For example, if certain goods are deficient, does the bill speak to the prohibition of selling them, exporting them, their production, and that sort of thing?
About the let me just make sure here, the cessation of the power of order to the cessation of manufacture of prescribed goods. Yeah, so we can, yeah, it does speak to
so you have the power to stop a manufacturer from producing goods if those goods are not being produced in accordance with a particular standard, or there's a breach to health and safety. So the Bureau has that power. You don't have it yet.
Well, because it's a bill.
When the bill is passed, yes.
Yeah.
The cessation of manufacture of prescribed goods. Now, what mechanism is in place for when people file complaints to the Bureau?
We're not Consumer Affairs. Consumer Affairs is the sister department to the Bureau of Standards. We are all under one ministry, and of course they have their role to play as well. So normally the first point of reference would be Consumer Affairs, and then Consumer Affairs would reach out to us, and we will take it from the scientific end and then report back to them.
Okay. Now we are going to go to the phone lines and hear what our listeners have to say. If they have questions, the overseas number is 1718-577-2916. That is 1718-577-2916. The landline number is 465-2555. That's the hotline. And the mobile number is 665-3173. We welcome your calls. Okay, now there must be penalties for when people are in breach of regulation, because people don't like to be compliant. Let's face it. And we saw that, well, I don't want to go back there. It's happy now to see that the vendors are in the market and so on. But you know how difficult it was in terms of them getting there. Yeah. Because people develop habits over a period of time, doing things in a particular way, not really operating by any sort of a standard, or operating by their own standards, rather than operating by the standards of a bureau. For example, change is not easy, and people do not accept change readily. So, what is the Bureau going to put in place to help people, or to get people to understand that they must operate by a certain standard?
Well, it comes down to awareness and information. The information we provide is free. Consultation we provide is also free. So if you're thinking about getting into business and you're registered with the other sister department, which is the small business, the SBDC, then automatically you're under the purview of the ministry. So we can provide guidance to you as a new business in terms of your labels. Quite a few persons would have reached out to us, were thinking about starting new businesses, and we are giving them that guidance, because it is important that you don't make those mistakes that could be costly to you. Sometimes persons would have already printed thousands of labels, and when they come to us to look at the label, then there's an issue, and these are some of the things we're trying to avoid. So it's best that you come to us. If you don't go through the SBDC and you decide you want to come straight to us, we also welcome that as well. You can speak to myself, you can speak to Mr. Mike. We can guide you as it relates to the label, and if you have any intentions of going into a particular market, we could also give you guidance on how to, what are the regulations that would be in place for that market. That is why when Mr. Mike pointed out to you that certain things can enter the EU. Okay.
We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Lesroy.
Good afternoon, Jamdo.
And good afternoon to Mr. Laplace and the other gentlemen here. We're coming so sharp. Welcome, guys, to Working for You. Lesroy, I have 3 questions to ask these young men.
Yes. Go ahead.
Because and I hope my good friend Edgy went to legislate and that's the US standard. They must work, they must legislate that officers from that department of the customs.
We are.
Along with consumer affairs, because consumer affairs are left along time now, you know that. Because minister development parliament, all consumer this and consumer that. But in the work system for people to take the wire. And Mr. Laplace, I would like you to get down to this wall and to know you all must come on the road, not just in the office, just in the consumer affairs. Come on the road and educate the people. Because what you say there is very, very important, you know. Especially with stuff coming in the country. And I would like you all to visit this Chinese shop where selling food with these standards around here. Lesroy, you have to bring up these guys some more on your program because it's very sharp. And they're thinking like we at the quarter hundred.
Okay, jump down.
The mother here is the 10,000 and listening to young man and they're very sharp. And I ask the Prime Minister to quickly forward some legislation of their department and navigate this in way. Because when you look at the hospital, they need lot of amputation less than who can pour the hands something on. Have a good day, Lesroy. This is the wrong fight.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking to see you all on the road. Because I'm a street man and these are the kind of things I like to entertain. Have a good day, gentlemen.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll let Mr. Laplace speak to the thing in customs, and I'll just speak on the road thing, right? When it comes to the road, I myself, I'm out there, especially when it comes to agro-processors and other government agencies. Even now, I am trying to put on a workshop on the 23rd of this month, and in St. Kitts at the Chamber of Commerce for agro-processors when it comes to labeling. So this is a free session that you can come to. We welcome you. Come, I hope that you can make it. You get a free session on what it is that you would need for labeling within our country as well as labeling if you want to export to the EU, right? The requirements are very similar as you will see. And then we do have another session over in Nevis on the 26th at the Agriculture Department. And this is how we hit the road. We have had many workshops and information sessions with people. I've been on the radio a few times as well to discuss labeling of products. We have a program of Up to Standard where we show what you're supposed to have when it comes to labeling. We had put out a drink to show you, a bottle drink to show you what you're supposed to have it, but then people understood it a little bit different. They said, well, You know, Mr. Mike, that only had included, that only was for bottled drinks only. It ain't mean me jam, or it ain't mean anything, but we want people to understand that it is any product that is produced within SKNIS and Nevis should have a label on it, right? With the very basic of information, where it was made, how much it has in, how much does it weigh, how to use it, who made it, how do I, if there's a problem, how do I contact you with it, right? What is in it? These are the questions that you need, that need to be answered, and these are very basic information that anybody would be able to answer, and should be able to ask and get answers to. Right?
Yeah, it's just like I had consumer affairs here. This might not be related, but in a certain sense, it is a standard, because when I pay for a good, or I pay for a service, I must have something to say that this is my receipt.
Yes.
And that receipt means then that if I am not satisfied with the good or not satisfied with the service, then I have some recourse, I have redress. I can go back and say, well, but in the absence of that, I have no evidence. I have nothing. So even if I'm buying from the man on the street who normally does not give me a receipt, suppose I buy something and I have to go back, he can say, well, I can't recall selling you this. Yeah. Or a retail shop in the village, they don't give receipt, but I have a right to a receipt. And so therefore, if I say, I buy this tin of corned beef at Miss Lou's grocery shop, Miss Lou, I want a receipt. Miss Lou, I don't have a receipt book. I said, well, write it on a piece of paper and sign it and give it to me. Stuart, the relationship between the...
Question from the caller as it relates to customs. Customs is in fact mentioned in our bill. We have a very close relationship with customs. Actually, the National Trade Facilitation Committee for St. Kitts and Nevis, customs is on that committee, as well as agriculture, health, port, tourism, almost all the ministries, environment, legal, IT. So we all work together behind the scenes, because as it relates to trade, trade involves everyone. Anytime you spend money, that is trade, right? So we involve in every aspect. Now, as it relates to the relationship further with customs, we will have some information sessions with customs to indicate what our interests are as it relates to trade, health, and safety. And they would be doing some of that work for us. We're not going to be physically at the ports, even though we're a border agency. We're going to basically consult from distance. So they would know what we're looking for, what is permitted to come in, what is not permitted to come in, and if there is any clarification needed, as pointed out in the bill as well, then we have direct consultation with the controller in terms of how do we move forward if we have certain instances. So we did include customs in this bill, and it's an all of society approach as it relates to the border agencies, so we work together specifically.
I noticed, Mr. Mike, you spoke about the inspection of local products, agro-processors and so on. What about the inspection of imported goods?
I wasn't speaking specifically to agro-processing. It would be the entirety of the thing. So, like, if we are able to do what we want to do in terms of getting this bill passed, as well as adopting standards and even making some regulations, you wouldn't be able to see things. When we go out to do our inspection, you should not be able to see very many. Some may slip through the crack because you cannot be everywhere. We're not omnipotent, but you should very well not see many goods in just a different language altogether where you cannot read it, right? You shouldn't able to, like in some countries, we've seen products, baby food, come in and they're telling you that not to be exported to the United States. It came from there, but you cannot send it back, right?
Just hold it there, Mr. Mike. We have another call. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Lafla,
Yes.
I don't see the family you're saying there. You are the work of this son. You never work for three people, you know. We want to see you are a deal of 20%. The office is big enough to accommodate a worker's force. We get to their transactions into the report. That's what we want. Have a good day. This is what we want.
Okay.
The items are logged, I guess, through ASECODA in advance. So we would know what is coming in based on the shipment. So let's say we have a technical regulation in place for bottled water. Customs receives a shipment that is showing that there is a large quantity of imported water coming in from 5 different clients. Then we would know in advance, even before the shipment arrives, and then we would put things in place to manage that. So that is what I meant by dealing with it from afar. We're not waiting until it gets here. We're going to be proactive and deal with it before. Now, I also need the caller to know that we get a lot of calls from persons who do business with businesses in St. Kitts, especially the retailers. So we would get we get calls from Germany, South America, Europe, and they would basically tell us this particular business is trying to import this type of macaroni. Do you have any regulations in place to stop that? Do you have any issues with that? And once we respond, they would proceed to send it down. So that's that's some inside information that basically happens behind the scenes.
Okay. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to everybody here.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I noticed something in one of the supermarkets I've been into. These choice cuts of meat. Very, the color is red and soft in touch. I would assume that if you have meat in a cold chill or whatever it is, it should be hot and you should be frozen. How come they managed to achieve this? The meat is soft to the touch, not frozen.
Is this imported meat or locally derived?
No, it's not local meat. It's an imported meat.
Okay.
That's hard to
Without seeing the product, it's
Yep.
it's a little bit difficult to ascertain what is going on there. We'd have to at least see the claim for that.
Okay. Caller, thank you very much. Right, so the department does a lot of testing and analysis. You have your inspectors, and the inspectors, they should have certain powers according to the Act to carry out their work. The bureau is headed by a director, you, Mr. Stewart, and then you have the minister, of course. Now, what are some of the powers of the director that the bill will speak to?
As it relates to regulation, once it goes through the rigors of the process of developing that regulation, it would come to me and I would write to the minister for further consultation. And based on her judgment, then she can decide for or against the implementation of the regulation. Similarly, the minister can implement requests for a regulation coming from cabinet to the Bureau of Standards to put a particular regulation in place that threatens environment, health, safety. and in some instances national security as well.
Now, recently we've seen the food vendors, and there has been a debate in the country in terms of health and safety, especially with respect to food vendors and agricultural produce vendors as well. We've seen them being moved to certain centralized or discussion locations. For example, the market and the across by the square for food vendors and so on. Now, health and safety was one of the concerns. And inspection of food. For example, do people have, again, do you have a food handler's permit? Or that might not fall on the, it doesn't fall on the your thing, it really falls on the health. It falls on the health.
We deal with more packaged
Mm-hmm.
items that are pre-packaged or
Right.
packaged.
But even though you don't deal with it directly, there's some relationship still because we're dealing with health and safety in terms of food and that sort of a thing.
Testing of the product.
Right.
So if health has a concern with a particular vendor or a particular product being sold, then they have access to the multipurpose lab,
Right.
where we can carry out some specific tests based on choice.
Right. Now, you know, sometimes you spoke about the recipe, Mr. Mike, and then there are certain things that you call secrets when it comes to recipes, trade secrets and that sort of a thing. I don't think anyone knows apart from, who knows the recipe for the KFC? That must be a secret. I mean, there's secret ingredients and things like that. Now, what does the bill speak to in terms of the secrecy of information?
In this particular,
Relating to any formula, as I said, relating to any formula, process or practice, for example.
Well, so you don't want to have false
Because you
information.
deal with patents and, okay.
Yeah, you don't want to have false information, or you don't want to have unlawful labels. So, in order for you to not fall into the bracket of false representation or those kind of things, right? You have to make sure that you put on what is in the product, right? You just have to do it. There's no way around it. This is something that is global. There's no, as I said before, there's no country that you can get away with that, right? So why do you think that you can get away with it here in SKNIS and Nevis? It's a simple, you're supposed to know what you're eating, what you're importing into your body, it's supposed to be there. Right? I don't know how else to stress it. I don't know how else to stress that. Right? So if you don't want to fall into the bracket to where you're where you may not be doing it intentionally, right? We may recognize that, but you just need you need to be able to do that.
Okay, we have another caller. Working for you, good afternoon. We seem to... Yes, Jamdo.
Yes, Mr. Lambert.
Like in there.
yes, yes, sir.
Yes, you know, we have some businesses around town. They are catering food and the cooking food, and then, you know, they sell the food to the nationals, the locals, and then, you know, they cook them. So I want to know where to send them. Because when you look at these people and how they cook and how they look in the back of the kitchen, it's best to get the food. Have a good day. Because this market is very, very important, you know. What you are trying to achieve is very good. And you are among the producing family. Have a good day. If you have no problem here.
Yes, we hear you, Lord. Well, that again, it's a health matter because it's cooked food. However, health could decide that they want to implement a particular standard with how food is being prepared and being sold in an environment or in a particular space, and we now would be tasked with identifying that standard, and they can decide which portions of that standard that they're going to regulate as a health body by saying things like you must have a bathroom, the place must be well lit, there must be no rodents or whatever. You can have those specific stipulations, but we are, the service in that aspect from us is to help to find a standard or help to develop one where one don't exist. We also have the capacity to develop a national standard specifically as it relates to that, if we cannot find a regional or international one.
We can also put some testing as well. So for example, we know that there are certain food spoilage organisms that make people sick, and if the health department see it fit, they can take samples of cooked food. You know that cooked food is not supposed to have any of these microorganisms, so we can help with that aspect where when they go out to the varying food vendors and take samples, we can test it to ascertain whether they have these microbes or not.
Right. Before we leave, just tell us a little bit in terms of your testing and analysis capabilities at the Bureau, because you're speaking now about testing. I suppose you will test for certain things like E. coli. Would you test for things like that? Yes. Bacteria and... Okay, tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
what have been some of the things that you would have tested for and analyzed in recent times?
We've tested a lot of things. We've tested things like food, cooked food. There was a time when we would go out and take food samples from varying restaurants and eateries, right? We would test for that. We also, the people that are serving the food, we would also swab their hands and that kind of thing. Even the utensils that you would be serving food on, just to see the microbial load that are there. We've tested water. As a matter of fact, we like to test water, especially when it comes to packaged water, because packaged water have this sense of, what's the word that I want to use? Safety attached to it. So much so that parents, mothers and so forth want to give their toddlers and babies packaged water, and so we are urging people to make sure that testing of that product is important. We also do things like even soil samples, right? When it comes to agriculture, the agricultural aspect, or even if there is maybe some contamination, oil contamination and that kind of thing, right? Then
air quality.
Air quality, we also do some air quality when it comes to mold and gases. Some of the gases are toxic gases, some are not, like carbon dioxide is not a toxic gas, but carbon monoxide is a toxic gas, right? Oxide and so forth. And then there's a chemical component where we test things like heavy metals for arsenic, lead, tin, those kind of things, mercury and so forth. As a matter of fact, there was this mercury thing where it was going around where we had to, the convention that is for it is the Minamata Convention. And so there was this project going around where we were seeing how much mercury that SKNIS and Nevis intake, and so fish samples were taken, breast milk was taken, hair samples were taken, and so forth, right? To do that kind of testing. Yes.
Okay. Recently, I heard that we know we have a lot of the sargassum seaweed. That is very, very. I've never seen anything like it. It is, it washes up on our beaches, and things like that. And recently I heard that it is very high in arsenic.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be. But it depends on where. If the area that it is coming from is polluted because of its filtrative abilities, it kind of soaks it up, right? As a plant material, any plant, they are what they eat. They are what they eat, so to speak. So whatever nutrients is available, arsenic is just as any other mineral like sodium or potassium and magnesium and iron, right? If they are metals, just like arsenic, and the plant will take it up as well.
I heard that weed comes from the Sargasso Sea. I suppose that's how it got its name, the Sargassum seaweed. But at the very same time, it is not only in the Sargasso Sea. It has spread to a lot of other.
And it's giving when it's breaking down the sulfur dioxides and the methane that is giving off. That's where you get that kind of rotten, smell and so forth. Yeah. So.
Okay.
That's right. Additionally, there can be test analysis done on the sargassum to see exactly what's in it, what was taken up as Mr. Mike pointed out, and what would be considered safe limits. Because if you're bringing something to be used as fertilizer in the land, for instance, like that is high in arsenic, you would be now repositing arsenic into the soil. And of course.
Not only fertilizer, but I saw something recently by the Department of Agriculture and Marine Resources saying that there's some plan to use it as fertilizer animal feed. Then
they may have been doing some research. We can't speak to that. It's possible that they would have been engaged in some sort of project that may address that, but we are not privy to that information. But that is a good start in terms of doing that research and analysis on the product itself. And if it can be recycled and used for another use safely, why not?
Yeah.
We have a lot of it, so it makes sense to capitalize.
I heard somebody say it can even be used to make cosmetics.
Yeah, we've heard that. I read research people if they've put it into industrial practice, but the research papers are beyond that.
And that is what
certain a lot of it, but the smell is terrible.
Yes, and you could find ways, because the African snail, for instance, it's now found a use for the eyeshadow makeup that women use. A lot of it comes from the shell of the African snail, and we have it in some of these territories. But of course, there's some trace, a little bit more than trace amounts of methyl mercury inside of the product. So of course, you also have to be careful. So there is a lot of balance as it relates to having something that could be a pest and finding an alternative use for it. It could be to the detriment of one's health. So you have to weigh the entire spectrum in terms of how you plan to use or the intent of use of the product.
Does the Bureau work with Marine Resources also in testing pelagics and so on for mercury?
Yes. We do. Mm-hmm. We work with all government agencies. So once there's a test request that would come in to us, then we would address it. If we cannot do it in-house, then we would seek assistance from one of our partnered international accredited labs to carry out that service. So we would have done work for them quite a few times in the past as well.
Now we're out of time. So anything you want to say before we leave?
Well,
this is your bill.
Yes,
you want to really sell your bill because you want it to be passed in the House.
Yes, this bill puts us on a staging platform to not only facilitate trade, but to help promote some of the local businesses on the regional and the international stage. We're here to help you, and we're also here to guide you. So we do not want persons to think that the bill is a policing tactic, but is a way to normalize the importance of standards and for us to develop a standards conscious culture and environment in which we operate. And this would further enhance the ability for us, as I said, to not only have free and fair trade within country, but also access external markets when internal ones become saturated as well. So that is the takeaway from me as it relates to the bill.
Well, I would speak, the bill speaks a lot on labeling and so forth as well, right? So I just want to go back to something that I said earlier, that in an effort to help people to conform to some of the stuff that is in here, the Bureau of Standards is putting on a information session, right, at the Chamber of Commerce on the 23rd of this month at 9:30 a.m. All are welcome to that. That is in St. Kitts, and in Nevis it will be on the 26th at around 1:30 p.m. at the Agriculture Department Conference Room in Nevis. Right? So if you wanna see some of the things that we would try and hope to regulate and legislate, you can come to that information session as well for that. Right? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Laplace, the Director of St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards, and Mr. Mike, German Mike, who is Head of Standards at the Bureau. Thank you so much for coming and sharing on such an important topic. We have to have standards. In the absence of standards, basically, we are selling ourselves cheap, we are selling ourselves short, we become a dumping ground for substandard goods and services and commodities and practices and so on, and we want to have the best, nothing but the best when it comes to standards, quality. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of our callers to today's program, and those of you who continue to listen to us from week to week. Thank you very much. We will be back next week with another Working for You program. Until then, I am Lesroy Williams. Take care.